Check, check. Whoa. Audio, audio. Symmetry, symmetry. So, I apologize in advance for the audio on this. I'm traveling on a business trip and doing this video from the road, and my microphone situation is suboptimal. If it's untenable, we will do it again. But for the time being, I think we'll just rock and roll. What we're going to be doing today is animation of different values that you can trigger with either a player controller or by selecting, you know, these in-space objects, or through triggers, the spatial triggers that we've been working with up to this point. It is day 12 in the 30 days of symmetry, and today we are doing triggerable animations. I'm actually pressing from my keyboard here in present mode and kind of just doing it, doing things all kind of in 2D. I'm pressing, I think you can actually see the keyboard call out in the bottom left. So I've got what's called a player controller, a set of player controller scripts, which really are just activating timelines, and the timelines have this packaged animation in them, and so you basically are setting up animations that are then looping and being triggered by buttons in the space, or not buttons in the space, excuse me, either buttons in the space or on the keyboard itself. So if I press J, I get this little animation that's these cubes kind of doing this little shuffle. If I press K, what is K? K is this fade to blue thing. If I press L, I get this rotate. The light shoots in and changes to green, so that's L. And then if I press colon, semicolon, that camera doesn't move, and that camera is feeding out to a monitor behind the actual cube objects. And then so then quote or apostrophe is the smoky arrival of this koala from Poly by Google. And you can combine these now. Like if I want to do the camera move, which happens on, what's that one on? What's that? Colon. I want to do that camera move and the koala at once. I press those two together. The other option I have is these in-space triggers, which I did 3 of them, so that that light turning to green is here available. Clicking on this green box, you can click on the blue box, and it goes, we get this blue overlay, and I click on the red one here, and I get that shuffle. I also set up something kind of a little fun. This object right here, the higher I click it, this red one, the higher I click it, the faster that animation goes, which is just the timescale property. So you can see how slow it's going when I click it at the bottom, and it'll speed up as I click to the top. So when I click it, I set it loose. I can also be toggling its time value. So right there, I'm making it go slow. I'm just holding down, just pressing, and I'll show you how to do that. That's pretty cool way to do it. Kind of toggle some value that's dynamic. You could do the brightness of a light, or the speed of the timeline animation, the amount of blue on an overlay, and whatnot. So now we're starting to really combine kind of script-driven value changes as well as timeline-driven value changes. So this is not all that. I mean, I threw this together in kind of like 20 minutes, and really it gets me excited to actually sit down and spend a Saturday, you know, really like doing something, you know, that's kind of you know, meaningful or more attractive, just a little prettier, and so yeah, that would just take a little bit of time to kind of finesse it, but let's dissect it and then we'll build it ourselves. So what do we have here? What we really have is a series of timelines. I was calling them, I started because I was using these red buttons and I was sort of making red and blue things happen, and then I started varying from that. But anyway, the beginning of my timelines set was this color, this kind of naming convention. But if I open these up, if I double click them, they will they'll open up here onto the timeline, kind of layer on, and I'll just open them all and get these tabs down here. The one that's called timeline here, that's the terrain space timeline, and if you press play, that's just running, and it's waiting for anything else to take place. And you can see that all of these, this green playhead on all these other timelines, is not advancing, and we'll be showing you why that is in a second. But basically, I'm not advancing on any of these other timelines, and I'm just waiting for a script to trigger one of these. And so let's take a look. When I go to the red timeline, what happens on the red timeline? Well, the red, if I click on this button, as you recall, this red button here, or I believe if I press J, I will trip this loose, and this playhead will begin to move, and it'll go all the way through until it gets to this green dot, this green keyframe, and then this green keyframe will send it back to the beginning. And so let's watch that happen. I think if I click the red button, I'll click it here at full value, and you see it cruising through. Each one of these key tracks is a positional key track of these boxes, and so as they animate, you know, this being kind of the bottom left box and whatnot. Yeah, so this like tells them where to go, and it's just a transform keyframe for each of those. And so again, if I press the red button, that happens. If I press the blue's sitting here and waiting, and if I press blue, we get this blue overlay. Just kind of the world kind of just becomes. It's actually just a viewport filter. It's a post-processing filter. We get blue. What happens with orange? What was orange? How do I trigger orange? I think orange was not. It's not colon. That must have been yellow. Orange is triggered by apostrophe. Ah, yeah. So orange is koala. I could change this to say koala timeline, and that would make more sense. But I've got this koala and this burst of smoke, and he manifests, scales up and scales out. And you can see koala scale key track goes up to some amount, comes back down. What else do we have? I also have a script in here that emits that burst of smoke, so that smoke is all happening here. Smoke, emit, burst. Anyway, so basically what we have going here, and this is the fundamental of the tutorial for today, is basically is that we have these timeline animations, and you've learned about these under the Learn menu under keyframing with timeline, number 11. And you've learned the basics, and there is a world of opportunities to you, because pretty much everything with this little triangle has this option of create new key track, right? So you can change the time scales, you can change the color of a light, whether it's on or off, how bright it is, you can change its position, its rotation, you can change which material, you can change cameras, you can change the cameras in a viewport, you can change which viewport renders to the master display, you can change so many things, and you can control them all with the timeline. So now this goes one layer deeper and lets you kind of control these timelines, let them loop through a little kind of circular animation, and come back to the beginning and stop and wait to be triggered again. So let's take a look at this red one, and we'll kind of see how it works. So basically what we have is a beginning position for all of our values. So this beginning value is going to be the same as our end value. It doesn't have to be, but that'll make it smooth so that wherever it ends at, it begins at that same location. So it's kind of basically all these things go out and back. They go away from their home and they come back to their home, and then they're ready to be triggered again. The main magic of this entire system here is using this script track. So you're going to be putting this script track on every single one of these timelines. And that's handled by pressing right-clicking inside the timeline space, either over here or even in the actual timeline territory. You're right-clicking and you're going to click New Script Track, and this gives you this script track. And the script track keyframes are these little green dots instead of these gray dots, which are like property values. These green dots are going to run a script. So the way that you can access the value at any location, if it's one of these keyframes, you can right-click to see what that value is. If it's a script track, you double-click it with left, double-click it, and it'll open up the script that's associated with this moment in time. So at this moment in time, the very first one, we drag it all the way to the side, and you can see the little helper there. That green helper says that it's at 0, like time 0, and in this script, I basically tell that I want my timeline to be false. So the timeline itself, this red timeline, is actually going to be active. The timeline, let me click on the red timeline. Red timeline is actually going to be, well, it is, sorry, at stop time, at the very beginning, this red timeline is going to be true. And it's going to say advance. And as soon as it advances to this little green script track, this little piece of script, this little one line, says wait, stop. So it's kind of queuing up. This thing is saying I'm ready to roll, and then as soon as it advances, you know, immediately it sets its the timeline to false. It's active to false, so it stops it. Then the button over here is what sets it to true. So let's take a look at the script inside of this red button. So if I right-click and hit Edit Code, ignore the pressing, that's the advanced thing. Right here, red timeline is this timeline. It's this timeline. And when we press this red, button in the space, this red object, it runs the onPress event, which goes and gets the red timeline, which is this, and it sets this active property to true. And so I could actually just click this button right here. When I click false, it'll switch to true, and it'll do the same thing as clicking this red button. So let's click this red button, and you'll see this thing move through. So now we move through because we set active to true. And then you saw it jump. Well, why does it jump? Let's double click this script and see what's in it. Another little simple thing. This one goes and gets the parent, which is the timeline, and rewinds it, which is a function of setting it to the beginning. And since the timeline is true at this point, it comes around the corner, restarts at the beginning, and then it runs right up against our first green script keyframe. And then it runs this keyframe and turns it off again. So we rewind while we're still true, and then we deactivate ourselves at the very beginning. And then pressing this button, we reactivate. You see I just pressed the red object in the space, and we reactivate, and then we rewind, and we immediately hit set active to false, and we disactivate. So at the beginning, just as a review of this, at the beginning, our timeline, our red timeline, is set active to true. When we press play, it lurches forward and gets stopped by the first script, which sets the timelines active to false. Then when you press the button that has the script, it activates that timeline. It runs through the animations, comes right up to the end, rewinds. It rewinds back to the beginning, and then it stops and waits until it's triggered again. And that's the loop right there. And it really involves these two pieces of code. Self-get-parent.active is false, and self-get-parent::rewind. One sets a property, the other runs a function which rewinds it to the beginning, and the two kind of work as these little bookends. Then basically what you do is you put your start and stop value, you put your beginning and your end values just inside the green, just inside these two time frames. And then these values are basically, clones, the beginning and the end values are basically the same. And if you ever want to, just clone them in you can multi-select them here in the timeline, hold down Alt, and drag off other keyframes if you should need to get exact keyframes. So we will do that here as we walk through this and create this. So beginning values that are the same as the end values, and they live just inside the bookends of these scripts. Setting the timeline to false, and setting the timeline its active property to false, excuse me, and then rewinding it while it's still active so that it comes back and hits the false. The other thing to just understand is that this script lives on this track, and the track has a parent, which is the timeline. So the timeline has children called tracks. So basically the function here, self get parent, says self, which is the script track, get parent, which is the timeline, and then the timeline has this active property dot active, which we're setting to false. Cool. So let's build something, and maybe we'll build something more interesting than this. Actually, let me show you one. I'll show you just this other one that I did. This is one I did yesterday, and this one was basically works like this. This is just this rapid. Let me open up these timelines. So I have a sketch timeline, I have a warp timeline. I was actually thinking of like creating a set of image filter effects that would happen every time you went through one of yesterday when we were working on the like portals. I was thinking, okay, every time I go through the portal, I want like all this like visual stuff to happen, and so I created this like warp timeline. It has all these different values that are brought in off of these image filters that I've added to the viewport. And so when I press the red button, you can see that I move through all these values, and it's chromatic aberration, which offsets the green, the red, and the blue in different ways. And I sort of picked kind of some random directions for that, and then maybe changed kind of the amount that it blends, and so you blend up and blend out. And I was like, that's kind of warpy. Like if I went through a time warp, I think I add blur, but obviously I could sit there. You know, I did this for about 20 minutes. I could sit there and kind of really tune that, and it could look cool. You can see me just sort of able to press it a few times. You can also add them together, right? So I can do what happens in blue. And blue in this, I think what's happening in blue, so that's the sketch timeline. So that's like the sketchy, which is like a combination of the gradient map and the edge detector. So I just sort of fade that in and out, and then I think I turn on it's the active property. I go from off to on, like active false to true to false again on an attractor that's in the space, and I think it's up here in the air. And so basically the attractor is off, then the attractor is on, it starts attracting things, and then it's off again, which I think is kind of a cool way to sort of kick up a bunch of activity, like generate a bunch of activity, which is kind of cool because you could literally turn kind of this attractor node is just a node in the space that has an object script that's running. It's on tick event, which means if the attractor has this little code in it, if my active is false, return don't run me. But if not, so if you put this code in a little node that like an on tick event, that means this script is going to run every frame unless this object is active. And so by default in this, when I press play, this active is set to false, but you'll see that when I click blue, it's going to jump to active, and then it's going to jump to false again, because that's been keyframed on this timeline, which is literally coming up to this active property and clicking here and creating a new key track. And so that's what this active key track is here, where we go from, let's right click, we see that we're false, then we're true. I can just hover over them, true, false, and there you go. So if I click blue, you should watch this little active, keep your eye on this little active property. When I click blue, we go true and then false. Again, oop, I can't, now. So I click blue, but I'm no longer selected on the attractor. Yeah, so blue, we go true, false. You can see it, true, false. Cool, so let's set one of these up from scratch, and it's actually really simple, and I think it's the kind of thing that you can use to create all kinds of great stuff. And we'll set some with on space triggers, and we'll do one with the player controller, because I know that's a really enjoyable, like the player controller is kind of key for a VJ kind of set where you want to kind of just press a button on your MIDI pad or on your keyboard. So let's just create a new world here. Save changes. No, we'll just leave it as it is. Let's pull in. Let's make our space just kind of like something other than this. This look. Let's create a little. I don't know, like a yellow-orange patchwork on the ground. I'm going to the diffuse paint under terrain. I'm going to enable the irregularity options. I'm going to make a huge swath here, and then I'm gonna put a few mountains in here, a few hills. Just create some kind of space. Do one more diffuse paint. Get kind of Bob Rossi with it. Maybe these hills have a maybe they've got like an orange cap. And I think this is low opacity. Oh, I can also change the wavelength. Get kind of a different thing going on here. Let's put just a little bit of vivacious green in the foreground. Okay, so now it's a very quick setup, and let's import like a Google Blocks model, something. We were working with the koala. Let's work with a rat. I feel like a rat is like, yeah. We'll see if this. I don't know if this is the rattiest rat. It's pretty huge. Oh yeah, super lab ratty. I like that. I'm gonna scale him down. I've just clicked R to toggle into R toggles into scale, and then W back to move. So I'm gonna start a rat out here, and I'm gonna have the rat, I don't know, maybe just sort of like spin will be one of our things. So we'll press a button, he'll kind of spin to the side, and then return to his position. Maybe it goes to night, and the rat does a little dance. So there's like a night plus rat dance moment. And let's do like an edge detect filter. So I'm going to kind of set it up how I might. I'm going to add a new image filter, and I'm going to go just like edges, so that I can filter into this. I'm just going to combine the two of these to begin with. So it's sort of like the rat can dance at night, or the rat can dance at night with edge detect. And let's just double check that if we go into nighttime, time of day, yeah, we're going to need a light. And I think the light, maybe we can oops. So I'm going to make this on the edge detect right now on the filter group that's containing edges. I have this property called blending, and if I toggle this down, I go to I basically am adding none. Like I've now taken out the effect entirely. I'm going to go back to. I'm clicked in the sky. I'm going to go back to like daytime. Edge effect plus nighttime, I just noticed doesn't really, it'll actually, it'll look roughly the same as edge detect generally. So let's just do rat dances and edge detect. So we're going to ramp it in and out of edge detect, and we're going to do something to the position of the rat as well. So when I'm going to create two different effects, I'm going to create two different timelines. So I'm going to right click up in my library to create timelines. One timeline is going to be for rat, one timeline is going to be for edge. So I'm going to create new timelines. I'm going to call this new timeline. That's the one that is selected when I come in. I'm going to call it rat timeline. And then I'm going to create one more timeline. I'm right clicking timeline, new timeline. and select it select it here. The properties will come up, change its name. So this one will be called Edge Timeline. And go ahead and double click these, and they'll pop up down here. And this is the timeline that you're like actively viewing right now, is the one that you're selected on, and this is the one that's going to receive properties when you decide to animate onto it. So let's make the rat dance first, and the way that that's going to work is you can see that when I press play, the terrain space timeline moves forward, the rat timeline moves forward, and the edge timeline moves forward. These animations, like I said, they're going to need to be set to true, and then we're going to be setting them to false immediately. So don't worry about them right off the bat. We'll get our animation going, and then we'll set the script that like stops it and rewinds it at the end. So let's do something that makes our rat dance. Well, to make him dance, or her, I don't know what we have here. To make this rat dance, we're gonna let's change its actual name to rat instead of what Google Poly had it import as. And we're just gonna come to the transform, select the rat up in its properties transform. We're gonna come here, we're gonna hit new key track. Then we're gonna double click its first position, and then what I like to do, you can always do this later, but what I'm gonna do is like hold down Alt and clone out. This means this, whatever position this is, I've just made an exact copy. I've Alt and left click and drag to make a clone of that, and that means this data is the same as this data, which means it's like its beginning and its end position are going to be the same, which means this rat will go out, do some stuff, and come back. And so in this case, I'm gonna have this rat like lean back first. So what I like to do is there's a lot of ways you can kind of set these keyframes. You can move forward in time, then change the position or rotation, change the values, right, of the transform, and then you can hit this button or double click at that moment. I actually will sometimes, create my value, then drag my time just nearby and create the interpolation with a right mouse button right here. And then what I'll do is I'll right click on my value here, and then I can adjust the values right here. Sometimes I'll do it in this fashion. I'm gonna have this rat one of the things you should know about your keyframes is that on rotations, if you want to do strong rotations, you probably are best creating a separate like animating transformation and rotation separately. So let's get rid of this transform for now, and what we're going to do is actually come into the transform. We're going to do a position track by coming over to position and hitting new key track, and then we'll go down to rotation and make a new key track down there. So create a first by double clicking in the space, then dragging it out a few seconds. You have your first and your ends, and it is also good to be in the habit of naming your tracks. So it'll come in called position key track. I like to just put a name on that, so it'll be called rat. And Euler angles is probably better set as rotation key track. So the first position I want on my rotation is I want my rat to rotate up to 90, and at this same time I want the position to have moved up to the tip of the tail. Great. I'm going to smooth these values, or those. I'm going to use the interpolation, smooth interpolation. So the rat comes up into position here. Then let's rotate around what's now the up, but it's the rat's forward, which would be like the Z direction. So that would mean Let's put the interpolation in here so I can see it. You can see that when it pivots, its tail kind of draws like a circle. Smooth will kind of interpolate between, so you'll get a little bit of blending of this value over into here. So you may want to go with, you know, something not anything other than smooth, like cubic ease in. This could be another cubic ease in, so you'd see what that looks like. Perfect. And then we will we'll do cubic ease out. And then I'll use cubic ease out here. So rat spins, rotates up, and then sure. You can see how you can quickly get something that's, you know, that you could spend a while actually like perfecting. So now, great, we've got a little animation here. So how do we get this thing kind of packaged with that code? Well, what you're going to do is you need to create that script track, because this thing, if I just press play, it runs. The terrain space runs, and so does the rat timeline. So I need to stop the rat timeline before it gets moving. And so the way that you do that is creating this script track. So we right-click here and we create the script track. So this is the secret sauce right here. And on the first one, we basically write the following: self colon get lowercase g uppercase p parent open close parentheses. That is going to return the object that is the this is self, the track. The parent is the timeline, so that's rat timeline. And then we go and get its active property, and we're going to set its active, the dot active to false. So self get parent, we're talking about the timeline, dot active equals false. Cool. So now when we press play, timeline moves forward, and rat timeline does not. Rat timeline, you can see it ever so slightly lurch forward and get stopped by this script track. The script track key event here. And so then if I was up talking to the rat properties and I set the active to true, all right, we release all of this animation and we're running it. Great, so all we need now to do is call, we need to rewind it when it gets to the end, and we just need to call active by pressing a button somewhere. So let's create the rewind track, and we're going to double click in the timeline and then double click on that keyframe, and we get to script track on event. So that's self get parent. You're going to be getting, if you do this a lot, you'll be getting parent. And in this one we run a function, so it's going to be a colon, and then it's going to be just lowercase r rewind open close parentheses, and that function will send it back to the beginning. So we need to do the following. We need to change the rat timeline's active property to true. We need to do this programmatically, but if I do it now, you'll see just like we were doing in the last one, we run through the animation and then we return to the beginning and we stop ourselves. Sweet. So now we just need to create a way to make the rat do its dance. So let's, we could create a button like we've been doing numerous times. We could have a trigger in the space, and we could do a player controller. So I could make this have an on press. Let's just press the rat to make the rat move. So to do that, I'm going to select the rat, come up to its top level, and click this little triangle here. This is the add attribute button, and we're going to add interactable, select interactable, and come over to the on press event. So when I click the on press event, our script window now shows me the on press event for pressing this rat. So what do we do when we press the rat? Well, we want this timeline, the rat timeline, to become active. So let's just drag in the rat timeline object, and it goes and finds it by the unique ID. And so we just need to call rat timeline dot active equals true. Kind of the counterpoint to the dot active. This one goes and gets its parent. This script goes and gets its parent, which gets the timeline and sets this to false. Sets active to false. Whereas what we do is we go and by the find unique ID, we go and get this timeline, and then we set active to true. which means that when we press play and we click the rat does the rat thing, does a little rat dance, comes back. Perfect. So then we'll hit stop. So we now have a rat timeline that is triggerable by clicking the rat. What if I just want to make the rat jump up and dance by clicking, by pressing a button on the keyboard? Well, awesome. So that's what we're going to use as a player controller. And so if you want to create kind of a whole show's level of controls, I can add a player controller to a variety of different places, but I'm going to recommend adding it to the terrain space. So on the terrain space, you can select it over here in the hierarchy. You could also select it here. Just come up to its properties, and on its add attribute, we're going to add player controller. And you see this little kind of gamepad, this sort of Xbox looking controller. On player controller, we can expand it. It's called player controller controls, so we could call this, like, might call it rat dance player controller controls. We'll see why it's nice to kind of name these specific to your show. We'll call it kind of the show. It's not specific to this one click. It'll kind of cover all of our presses here. And the way this little plus button is your ability to add new buttons. And so if you're pressing like a keyboard, you're going to want kind of the like on-off button user input. And so this will be what we call this. We'll call this rat dance. This will be the name of this button press, this interaction, and we're going to bind it with something. So let's bind it with a key that we'll remember. We'll call it rat. We'll just bind it to J. So what I did there was I clicked kind of this like hyperlink. It's sitting there. It says press a control. So I'm going to press J on my keyboard, and it's now bound to J, which means if I press J, I'm gonna create the rat dance event. You see this event down here, just like the on press event of the rat. The rat's like interaction. It's interactable attribute. This event on our player controller, when we press J, we're gonna run this script right here. Whatever happens in here on rat dance, and so on rat dance is basically going to be the same thing as what we did when we pressed, when we did this on press of this rat. So what did we do there? We basically took the rat timeline, and we're just repeating what we did last time. Take the rat timeline, rat case timeline, and we set its active property is equal to true. So which means that when I press play, all I need to do is press J to make the rat dance. Right? Very cool. One thing that you should note is that these on-off buttons in these player controllers, this player control again lives on the terrain space, so I can actually just click on the ground and get my player controller to come back and look at my on rat dance. One thing you should know is that an on-off button the script gets called once when it's pressed down, and once when it is released. So it gets called in the on moment and the off moment. So technically, whenever you're using this, it's giving you a Boolean value, either a true or a false. And so if you just want to run something using an on-off button, it's nice to embed this little logic, which is if b value is equal to true. This means when you press the on button, then do that thing and then end, so that this becomes. This only happens on the down press and not on the up press. In this case, it doesn't really matter because if it comes back up, it just calls it true again, and just says, "Oh, I'm true again." You press it down and it goes true, true. It runs it down, true, true. But it's good to be in the. This won't always be what you won't always want that. You want to control for something happening when you press it down and something to happen when you press it up. So B value is true when you press it down, and B value is false when you press it up. So when you press J down, it passes in B value, and while you're holding J down, nothing's happening because this is just on off. When it goes off, it runs this script again and it passes in false. And in that case, since B value is not false, we don't run this. So this will just run one time. Anyway, something to pay attention to when you're using these on-off buttons. The other thing is a continuous button. If you wanted to hold something down, it'll run the script. It'll run a script while you're holding that button down constantly. And there you go. So we have our rat dancing, and we have two ways to trigger our rat dancing, and it nicely loops. I can press the rat, goes up and dances, comes back, and stops the timeline so it's ready to go again. I can also hit J. Great. So this is just a position kind of key track, and that's on our rat timeline. So now let's change the amount of edge filter that I see. So for example, maybe we want to do this on a timeline. So we go in and out of from 0 up to 1 and then back on the image filter edges. So I'm going to animate this stuff. I'm going to animate just this property, this amount property. I mean, I could put this amount up, and maybe I tinker with, like, you know, that value, or, you know, this value could be a part of it. But I think, you know, for all intents and purposes, I just really want to do no edge, lots of edge, no edge, which means I'm going to take this amount value and key track that. And so what I'm going to do is do that, but I don't want to do it on my rat timeline. I want to do it on my edge timeline. So I need to open up edge so that it's the tab that's selected, and I don't have any key tracks in it yet. And what I'm going to do is come up to the amount, my image filters property, and this value that I want to toggle. I'll go to new key track, and it populates the first key track down here. And see, it didn't go to rat, and it didn't go to terrain space, and none of my rat went to terrain space. It goes to the one that's open when you select that, which is key, because now you're basically, I'm now just building this timeline. And you want to pay attention. You'll mess that up occasionally. I certainly have, kind of, you know, fill it, and be in the habit of naming your tracks, because it'll say amount key track, and when you start adding a ton of them, I promise you'll forget what they mean. And so this, you'll want to Simmetri doesn't always know the context of this key track, so it's up to you to really kind of describe what it is. And so what we're talking about is the amount. This key track is the amount of the edge filter. So I'm going to name this key track. So I select the key track down here, and I'm going to name it up here. So I'm going to call it edge filter amount key track. So there we go. So now I can see that it's edge filter. When you get a lot of these, like I said, you'll see like 3 different amounts, and you'll be like, ooh, which one was that? Or like 4 different transforms. And so I've got rat position and rat rotation, which is helpful on that one. So anyway, so let's do the edge detect, and I'll kind of move through this pretty quickly. It's at this point we have the amount, so I'm going to do 0, and I can clone this one off. This is basically the amount is 0. When I right click it, I can see the amount is 0, and at 1 second I just double click to create an amount, and I'm gonna pull the pull the slider all the way out to 1, and then I'll set some sort of interpolation in here. So let's call this exponential ease in. We'll call this exponential ease out. And then, since our timeline doesn't, you want to build it and kind of test it before you, I think that the best last step is to put those the start and stop in there, and then do your button. So you do your values, you get your kind of animation the way you like it while it runs without any stopping, and then you'll put your start and stops, your stop, and then your rewind. So let's do that again. We're going to create the script track, right-click, script track. We've got our script track in here. We're going to double-click and drag it all the way to the left, and double-click in that, and we're going to say self:"get parent" with a capital P, parent. Spell it, P-A-R-E-N-T, open close parenthesis, and this one's .active equals false. This is our little stopping gate. I can actually just alt-click and drag it, and take it to the end, just outside of my last values. Double-click it, and I'm just going to change this. Hypothetically, that would save you a little bit of time. I'm going to get the parent, then I say colon, and then, which means I'm going to run the rewind function, and anytime you run a function, you need the parentheses, so open close parentheses. Self-get parent rewind. So now, I can press play, and I can actually set this active from false to true during playtime, and I can watch the effect play out. So this is cool. I like it. What if I want to like kind of edit this after the fact? Well, I think one of the main things you want to do if you are going to edit things is you know, either just change if you're just changing the position of things, you can kind of select all the things at the end and say, you know, oh, I want to drag all these to the side, so you can lasso select and move things around. So this, I could make it like faster here, make it happen kind of faster. Maybe you change the interpolation. If you need to change the beginning or end values, I do recommend that you if you change one, just you know, re-clone it and then delete the one prior, and then just get these ones kind of inside the green script track. You want these to, the green should always bookend it. If you want to get, you know, really fine-tuned and finessing this to be really smooth, because timing is really key to you, you can always use your mouse scroll wheel to scroll in. And you know, you're working in like milliseconds here, and so you can get really really fine-tuned that way. Okay, so our rat is, we don't have any way of triggering this edge timeline, right? So that's the last step. So we've set our values, we like it the way it is, we tinkered with it after the fact, we've got our script track bookending, we've got our stop and our rewind, and now we just need to set the edge timeline to true by pressing something. So we could just do another player control, and that would be fine. You can also just, you know, put like the equivalent of a button in the space. And so I could add an interactability to this. I could say interactable, make an on press event. I can go get the edge timeline. I can get it from the library if I want. Edge timeline dot active equals true. So that'll do it. So we'll do our edge thing, and now I can kind of combine them. So I'm try to time them. One is not quite the timing of the other. Right. And so you can imagine, you know, I've done these to be really small sequences, but you can imagine doing even like a couple minutes of sequence here, right? And then you get these really interesting overlaps, which could be pretty cool, right? Like one of the things that you'll find as well, though, you can, something to watch for is, and I did this in the other show, is I can with a single property, like this edge value, I can have that value being placed on multiple timelines, but one of them is going to win over, or you may find them strongly conflicting. So you want to maybe pay attention to not kind of over, like having two, what's the right way of saying this? If I've got the rat, and its rotation, I can have like rat 2 timeline, which has the rat doing a different thing with its rotation. But if I run both of them at the same time, they will conflict, and so you'll want to kind of manage your state, so to speak, and be kind of your own state machine. You'll want to make sure that that the overlapping effect or the competing effect of the two timelines trying to assert their values isn't going to be something you don't want. And so just one thing to consider as you begin to add out a lot of timelines and run kind of the combined effect of many things. So you may want to sort of think about packaging a set of properties into one timeline. Or, you know, saying, okay, this is more like the movement of this object. Here's the movement of the background. Here's, you know, another timeline for like for camera move A. Here's camera move B. Here's time of day. Here's, you know, something. And you can kind of almost package them as little stories as well, and then see what happens as you build up a lot of interesting kind of combined effects. So let's write one more function just for the sake of, you know, one more press event in the player controllers to be able to control this all from the keyboard. And that'll be the end of this lesson, and we'll be excited to see what you create with this. It seems kind of seemingly endless. And so the player controller, it lives on the terrain space, so I can actually just right-click the terrain space and hit edit code. I actually don't want to hit edit code, excuse me. I need to select the terrain space and come up to its properties. And I want to go to the player controller down here, and then I'm going to do another on-off button. So another on-off button, and it defaults by calling it number 2. And this one I'm going to call edge, like edge on, and then, or whatever, and just call it edge. And then I need to set a default binding for it. So I'm going to press it, when it says press a control, I'm going to hit K, which is great. And then I've got this other event. Right now you can see that on rat dance is slightly lighter than on edge. That's because it lives in script now. It's populating the object script. If I click on edge, that will populate, and now they're the same color. Just a nice little indicator that on edge needs a function. So on edge is going to take the function of, it's going to look just like this, except it's going, so I can actually copy and paste that. I just need to change, you know, the timeline that I'm setting to active. So what timeline am I setting to active? Edge timeline. And so I'll type edge timeline, and let's remove that line, and we'll tab that in, and that in. And again, if b value is true, that's when we press the button down. B value comes in as true. When we release it, it comes in as false. So this will only happen once, and that means that when I press the letter K, we run this event. This piece of script runs. The edge timeline gets the edge timeline. We set the dot active property to true, and we get the edge effect. And so we've got a scene. We can make the rat dance by clicking it. We can make, when it gets back to its position, we can make the rat dance by pressing J. And you'll see my controls over here. We can make the edge effect happen by clicking the box in the space. We can make the edge effect happen by clicking K. And we can also press J, then K. And we get the combination of the effects of the rat dancing and edge. Super cool. So I'm going to do one last little piece to this lesson. I remembered I teased the, you know, setting some value, and creating a thing like a slider, that where you click it, the lower you click it, the slower the timeline went. So let's actually do that we'll do it on this same box, or actually no, let's use a different one. So I'm going to make this box, and if we click up here, the rat's going to dance faster, and if we click down here, the rat's going to dance slower. And so rat dance faster, rat dance slower. So how does the rat dance faster or slower? Well, I'm going to show you how. On any timeline, let's take a look at the rat timeline. On any timeline, we're now here looking at the rat timeline. On any timeline, it's got this time scale, and that's literally how fast it's going to move through here. Right now, we've designed it to move through. If the time scale is set to 1, it will move through its dance in about 4 seconds. So we click the rat, and it takes about 4 seconds to accomplish its thing. It stands up for 1, then spins for 1, and then it's back by Well, yeah, what? That's 4 divided by 3, roughly. So if we want the time scale to change and go slower, we can, you see I've just scrolled this time scale down and it's now basically in slow motion. You can see its time is just creeping along. Whereas the terrain space timeline is cruising, the rat space timeline is just inching along. And that's because I've got this time scale at a really low value. So playing with the time scale dynamically becomes really potent, because you can imagine how I remember to double clicking puts it back to 1. You can imagine how this seeing things at the same time scale can get pretty repetitive. So to be able to kind of toggle the time scale is nice. So we've already been toggling a property. We've already been setting a value on the timeline. In fact, in our script right here, when we edit the code on our rat, the press event already toggles a value on the rat timeline. It toggles the active property, right? What we want to toggle on the rat timeline, I'll put the rat timeline right here. What we want to toggle on the rat timeline is the time scale. So how do we do that in a way that is interactive and dynamic? Well, here's one way, and it's going to involve one new piece of script, which is very, very helpful. You'll notice we're going to set up the interactable, so we're going to make this a button that we can control stuff on. So on this button, to set that up, we're going to select our box. Let's see how tall we are, by the way. Just the height, it's 4.5 units. Think of that as meters. It's 4. We'll make it exactly 4. And you'll see why in a second, because the height that we click on this is going to dictate. So let's set up the interactable on our object. So we're going to go to our box 2. We'll call this like slider box. And on slider box, we're going to create an interactability. So we're going to add interactable. And then what we're going to do is use on pressing. We could use on press. That would be fine. And we could use on pressing so that it'll happen while we like keep our button held down. We'll start with on press. So on press. First of all, we're going to make the rat timeline get activated. So let's make this a button that activates the timeline, but also, like, depending on where we click it, it picks the time scale that the rat is going to go at. So we're gonna do repeat what we did, where we make the rat timeline dot active equals true. So that means that when we click it, the rat moves. But let's also set, before we set the timeline to active, let's set the timeline to a value. So rat timeline dot time, lowercase t, uppercase s for scale, time scale. Because if we look at the time scale on the rat timeline, it's 2 words, time scale, so it's lowercase t then uppercase s. The rat timeline dot time scale, let's just set it to half speed. Like, it's 1 now. Let's set it to 0.5 speed, which means slower. And so when we press play, if we click the rat, it goes normal speed. And if we click the box, it'll go half speed. Okay, that's cool. So we can see that we can already set the time scale, but let's set the time scale to something dynamic. By dynamic, we mean something that's changing depending on where we click it. Well, how do we know what do we mean by where we click it? Well, we haven't even addressed this stuff up to this point in the lessons, in this 30 days of symmetry, but you've got some really useful information in here. And if you press F1 on seg, you will discover it's going to pull up your browser, and it's going to grab a file from your that lives, it's packaged with symmetry on and C colon. And seg is a segment, and the segment from the pointer tip to the surface point of interaction. So the segment has a start point and an end point. So I'm going to explain what that means. The segment, think of the laser on a laser pointer. The segment is a segment of a line. It's like a line from point A to point B, from start point to end point. The segment is the line segment that starts at like the camera where the mouse is, and ends with it's a line that draws straight out into space to wherever it collides. It's a ray kind of cast directly out from the camera into that to that object. In the case of the mouse pointer, it's from the camera through the cursor, to where the cursor is hitting that object in space. So wherever I collide with this object in space, if I click it down here where it's like low on the ground, that end point of my segment, the end point of the segment is going to be low near the ground. So it'll be like the end point segment will be something in the X, something in the Z, and the Y will be almost 0. And if I click up here, what did we make it? We made it 4 meters. The segment point will be something in the X, pretty much the same as what it was below, same Z, but the Y will be up at 4. And if you were to think about the segment, if I was interacting with something way out here, that segment is really long, but the point out there is much higher. It's like, high in the air, so that segment will have like a really high Y. So anyway, so seg is passing in this segment object, which you can call a little function on to get that little point in space. So what's that point in space on this object? I now kind of have this little interface, almost like a slider, where I can say down here it's 0 and up here it's 4, if I'm talking about the Y value of that end point of my segment. So the segment's endpoint Y value is going to range from 0 to 4 on this object. So all we need to do is we just need to know how to access this. So if I look at seg again, and I click on segment, segment has this thing called get endpoint. It returns the ending point of the segment. So if I run, I'm just going to actually Control C, so I can copy it out of here, come back to symmetry. So if I go, I'm going to set the time scale to something, but let's just store our segment in a value. So we'll say just that endpoint. So I'll just call it point until I think of something better. But point equals seg. I can grab the segment. I'm saying seg, and then I pasted it, but I need to put a colon here. Seg colon get endpoint, open close parentheses, and that returns a point. And let's actually print it just so you see it. We print point. Let's print to string, all lowercase, and then we'll say point. We don't have. We'll just comment that out for the time being. And you should see it printing right here. Yeah, so that point is exactly 3.7. Look at the Y there, 3.7. Like I was saying, click at the bottom. The Y value is really low. Click up above, and it's almost 4. So I can make this thing go 4 times as fast, and I can make it go really slow. I can also divide it by 4, and then I have kind of a 0 to 1. But how do I get the Y value? Well, just like any point or any vector, I'm basically going to say that I'll say just like Y val equals point, and then I just say dot Y, and then let's actually print. Again, we'll print to string, and we'll say Y val, and let's do that one. So you see the full point here with the X and the Y and the Z, and then you see that the Y, just the Y, is this single value here. Sweet. And let's go ahead and what we'll call normalize it. So we know that this thing is 4 units high, and so I can go from, let's say that we want it to go from 2 to 0. That means I'm going to take my I'm going to say like amount is going to be this new variable, or like I'm going to say like like new time scale is equal to, and this is going to be the y val, and we're going to divide it by 2, so that when it's 4 it'll be 2, when it's 2 it'll be 1, and so on. So we're going to divide it by 2, and then I'm going to set this time scale. So here comes the magic moment. We've done our calculation. We got our endpoint. When we click, it passes in seg, so point is equal to seg get endpoint. We don't need to print that anymore, and we don't need to print this anymore. So we've got our endpoint, and that's called point. Y val is point.y, and that's just a single value. We're going to make it kind of change that, like adjust that to new time scale equals, y value divided by 2. That's kind of normalizing, or getting it prepared how we want it. Now it's right here where we're going to set the time scale. So the rat timeline, it's referencing our rat timeline. Rat timeline.timescale is going to equal new capital T time capital S scale, and that's going to equal wherever our point is divided by 2, all that. And then we're going to set it to active. So now we've got this time scale that goes sets to active in our rat timeline runs true. I did something wrong here. Unexpected symbol near equals. I've got 2 equal signs in here. So you can see it moves fast up there, moves slow down here. So this is cool, but I'm not able to change it dynamically. So this works, and this is cool. So what if I want to change this while I'm pressing, so I can like kind of slide up and kind of change the value? Well, we need we need something more than just this on press event, because this just runs when we press it. So I need to kind of like I need to set this time scale. I need to basically do all this stuff, this calculating of the point, and I need to do that while I'm pressing and holding down. And so what that means is that on our object here, on the interactable, right now we have a press. Let's add, again, we're on the slider box. Just, I selected the slider box, interactable. We have our on press. That's this on press. But I want to click on pressing so that it happens every frame while I'm pressing. And so the same thing, you've got the val, you've got the seg. This one actually has val, which is passed in from the VR controller. So like the amount that you're holding down the button. So like 0 to 1 on like the index trigger of the VR. But the rest is the same: seg, normal, and anchor. Seg, normal, anchor node. So it's seg that we're working with. So we go again, point equals